That is, I think, the key thing
Oh, I
with
can't wait.
glyphosate.
Yes. Oh, we're going to go there.
I really like a puzzle. I love working puzzles, and this puzzle is just the mother of all puzzles. Glycine is an amino acid, and it's the smallest amino acid, and it's extremely important in biology, certainly in the proteins. I look for diseases that are associated with mutations in glycine residues in certain proteins. And then you correlate that with, is that disease going up dramatically in association with glyphosate? Sure enough, it is. Huge list. And I have to say, it's not being well received. I just want you to understand that. The chemical industry and agrochemical industry, they say, no, this can't happen. It's impossible. So this is where we're sitting right now. I think it's almost certain that it's happening because my evidence is so strong.
We cannot get rid of these chemicals or people won't have food. So what do you think the outcome of that law? I'm so curious. What do you think is going to happen there?
Well, we'll lose the species, basically, is what will happen.
Oh my
gosh.
Disappear.
I mean, I think that's where we're headed. We're going to disappear if we don't change things. I believe that.
Well, let's go into it because Dr. Stephanie Seneff, you've been asking for me to interview her. She's an expert on glyphosate. She has many theories in regards to autism, celiac disease, many mechanisms at play. And I think this is going to be really, really eye-opening, especially in light of what's going on right now, how Bayer's coming in and trying to kind of take away the liability for the companies making glyphosate and other or herbicides. So Dr. Seneff, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here. I'm so excited.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. So tell us, right? You have been talking about glyphosate for at least over a decade, I'd imagine. And we're seeing 2012. Yeah. So almost 15 years. And we have ongoing legal battles, regulatory debates, and new research emerging constantly. So as of right now, this point in time, what should we all know? What are current developments in litigation, and what are these lawsuits going on, and what's changed?
Yeah, well, of course, there's been this enormous pressure on Bayer because of the lawsuits on non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. That's almost killing them. I mean, it's just really, they decided to take glyphosate out of the Roundup that they sell to the public, for career lawn here in the United States. They no longer have glyphosate. They've put in several different other chemicals to cover for what glyphosate used to do, which shows you how powerful that chemical is. It kills all plants except for those that have been engineered to resist it. Many of the herbicides are specific to certain kinds of plants and other ones aren't affected, but glyphosate kills them all. Wow. And the idea that an herbicide that kills all plants is completely harmless to humans is like insane, in my opinion. It's insane.
Yeah. And what are the mechanisms? Like, how have they gotten away with that? Like saying that it's not toxic?
Yeah, it's a good story. If it were true, it would be lovely. But the basic story is true that it critically affects an enzyme that plants have. It's in a pathway called the shikimate pathway, and the enzyme is EPSP synthase. And that enzyme is so important to the plant to all plants that it kills them, except for those that have this engineered gene, which is a version of that enzyme that isn't affected by glyphosate. And actually, it's very interesting how it was changed to do that, and we can get into that point later. So all these GMO crops, you can spray glyphosate all over them, they don't die, which makes it super easy to handle weeds. Weeds are a big problem in crops, and they really struggle with how to deal with the weeds. And certainly hiring a bunch of people to pull the weeds is costly financially. And also, of course, people don't want to pull weeds. Nobody really wants that job. Although I think it's actually better than a lot of other jobs you could have, to be honest with you.
I kind of enjoy it. It's a little bit satisfying to me. It feels like that immediate feedback.
Me too. Yeah. I remember pulling all the dandelions, out of my yard. I always did that by hand. I never used any chemicals on my lawn my whole life,
Me neither. Us neither. We're in Colorado too, but we are surrounded by people who do, right? But we still protect. Yeah, we protect our lawn for sure. So tell us, how was this approved? I know it was patented as like an antibiotic, and it kind of chelates minerals, and there's impacts on the gut microbiome. Can you just give us a broad overview of like what exactly is glyphosate doing, and how have they tried to convince the public that it isn't doing these things? Have they written papers?
Yeah, what they say is that we don't have the enzyme, we don't even have the pathway, so therefore we're totally safe. It's a great chemical, kills all the plants, doesn't harm us. It's a complete lie in the sense that, well, the big sense is our microbes, because the gut microbes have the pathway, use the pathway to produce essential nutrients for the host. So when we kill off our microbes with glyphosate, our gut gets imbalanced and we get all these problems that we have with the gut today. There's like a huge list of them. Like constipation is going up. Autism is very strongly connected to gut dysbiosis, celiac disease, inflammatory bowel disease, irritable bowel disease, colon cancer. All these things are going up, over time. And like, well, we just have, I don't know, our microbes are just not doing well. We don't know why,
Yeah.
we have no idea why, but here we are poisoning ourselves with glyphosate in almost every bite we take. It's like, hello. In my
Yeah.
opinion, it's obvious.
Yeah. And you said you've done some papers, I think it was done with Dr. Huber, where all of these conditions are kind of rising in lockstep as the amount of pesticides or herbicides or glyphosate specifically rise.
Yeah, glyphosate in particular. I mean, it's incredibly strongly correlated. And Nancy Swanson is the one who collaborated with me on a number of papers. She wrote the first one without me, and
Okay.
she contacted me because of my paper that I published at about the same time, and we traded notes, and then we started collaborating. It was really a fun ride. And we published several papers together, and it was just amazing. We rummaged through all this data, and it's available online. You don't even, it's not even behind, you can just get it for free, the data that the US government provides on glyphosate usage and on the rates of all these diseases over time. So we just went through all these diseases looking for specific ones that were going up dramatically, and then correlated with glyphosate. And there it is, perfect match. I mean, it's just incredible. When you look at her first paper, she had like over 30 figures in that paper. And many of them are just showing all these diseases perfectly matched, going up, Alzheimer's, autism, Crohn's, inflammatory bowel disease, liver problems, kidney problems, cancers like thyroid cancer. I mean, it's just amazing. Pancreatic cancer, huge list. And of course, autism was absolutely perfect match.
And I know, and I think that's why you initially got very interested in this area. And there are so many factors happening, right, all at once. What are the conditions that you are like very positive, have at least a correlation or could be negatively impacted by glyphosate? Or do you think all of them at
I
some
think all
level?
of them actually.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
really
Yeah.
do. And it's been fun. I mean, I love puzzles, and I've just enjoyed so much the research over the past, gosh, as you say, over a decade. I've been completely wrapped up in reading biology papers. I'm just like, I'm in school, I'm getting a PhD again. It's like I'm just
And you already
reading so
have
many
one.
papers. Yeah. And so it's funny, but I love it because I really like a puzzle. I love working puzzles. And this puzzle is just the mother of all puzzles. It's so cool. And you tie it together in all these different dimensions. You look at first you find the correlation. I mean, there's a whole procedure by which you can sort of say, okay, this disease looks interesting.
Yeah.
And it starts often with the correlation. If the disease is going up in step with glyphosate, then that's a candidate, right? And then I start looking at, well, people have genetic defects, that can cause that disease. So things that are genetic defects that are associated with that disease. Then you look at those genes, and then you say, do they have critical glycine residues? That's how I proceed.
Nice.
And you'll find particular glycine residues that if they're altered genetically because you have a mutation, there you have that disease. And that disease is going up in step with glyphosate. So then I say, aha, that's a glycine that's going to be vulnerable to glyphosate substitution. And that is, I think, the key thing.
Oh, I
with
can't wait.
glyphosate.
Yes. Oh, we're going to go there. But first, I just want you to tell people who might be new to this. I think you've been doing such a good job educating the public about this. There might not be that many people who don't know, but where are glyphosate residues most impactful in terms of in the environment? Are we eating them? What things are we eating that contain the most?
Okay, it's pretty much all food. I mean, it's pretty
Yeah.
amazing. And my friend Zen Honeycutt, do you know Zen Honeycutt? She's
I
amazing.
do. I do.
Yeah, she's
Yeah.
so great. And she has moms across America.
Yeah, and we had Dwayne Lee Johnson. He was in my Rethink Meat, and so we got to see his story and his settlement. So we should probably touch on that too. But yeah, tell us
Yeah, I
about
met
Zen.
him in person. He's so great. He came here to Hawaii, and actually, he caused Hawaii to pass a law that eliminated glyphosate usage on school grounds in Hawaii, which is so awesome. And I met him at that time, and his wife. It was lovely. I love him. He's so great. He had the courage to do that first trial. That I remember when it was going on, I was like, well, he's just going to lose. They're going to put all the best lawyers, and they're just going to, this isn't going to work. I remember the moment when I heard that he had actually won a huge settlement. I was like jumping up and down with joy. I don't remember the last time I was so ecstatic because that was crucial, really crucial. And that certainly caused them a huge headache with
Yeah, it was
this
a
chemical.
precedent-setting case. And how many, just for anyone new to, and then we'll go back to the where it's found, but how many other lawsuits have been
Oh,
settled?
there's
What if,
probably over 100,000. I mean, that's why they're so overwhelmed. And there have been several others that have gone through and gotten large awards after
yeah,
that one. And now there's all these people waiting in the wings for their money. And that's why they stopped selling it. That's why they stopped putting it in Roundup. And they actually, they're happy to have it be used on the crops because the farmers can never prove that it's glyphosate that caused their non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. They're exposed to so many chemicals. The
right.
chemical company always points to the other one. Oh, it wasn't glyphosate, it was that other one, so they can't win a
Mm.
lawsuit, the farmers. And so we can go ahead and keep poisoning the population with the food.
Mm.
And so glyphosate can continue to be used on the farms. And of course, the farmers have found it so convenient that I think it is very hard for them to imagine. This is what's happening is they've gotten to the point where they rely on it so much, they can't imagine not having it. And that's why we say, oh, we're going to starve if we don't have glyphosate. We're going to starve. We have to allow all these non-Hodgkin's lymphoma people to have no recourse. We have
Yeah.
to do that because otherwise we're all going to starve. I mean, that's the argument they're using basically, which burns me up because the
Oh,
farmers need to find a way, and there are farmers who are finding a way.
yes.
And with technology too, you can use technology to kill the weeds at this point because we have very smart, capable robotic tractors that can have vision capabilities. You know how AI has just come to life in the last
Yeah.
10 years. There's a tremendous opportunity here for AI applications with sort of small robotic tractors that can go in, recognize weeds, kill them with a laser or with hot water. It seems to me, I may be naive, seems to me that could work.
I think that you're not naive. I think that's probably has to be the future. I know two farmers at least who believe that chemicals they were using contributed to one Parkinson's and another one ALS. So, no, I think it's a huge problem. And I did see the member of the USDA testifying that we cannot get rid of these chemicals or people won't have food. So,
Yeah.
what do you think the outcome of that law? I'm so curious. What do you think is going to happen there?
You mean whether they're actually going to succeed in getting this passed? I don't know. It's worrisome, very
Yeah.
worrisome, because Trump doesn't seem to have the same feeling about glyphosate that RFK Jr. has. I wish RFK Jr. could put pressure on Trump to say you can't do this, you can't let this happen. Well, it isn't even up to Trump; it's Congress, of course. So
Yeah.
I mean, he could veto maybe, but that he doesn't have the full power to stop it. And they have been putting so much money. They've been investing in individual states, and I think a couple of states may have already passed laws. I used to know I don't want to say which ones they are because I'm not sure I've got it right, but I think a couple of states have already passed laws that say, no problem. If you've got non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, too bad for you.
Oh,
I believe that's true, but they've been working on individual states and applying lots of pressure to the legislators of those states to get them to individually pass these laws. They work very steadily on the states at the federal level, and they try to remove power from the states. And they do this in Hawaii too. They remove power from the counties. Counties in Hawaii passed laws restricting toxic chemicals. And then the state government basically said, well, you couldn't pass those laws because the state has that power. You don't have that power. So
wow.
all these laws that got passed after much fighting, in individual counties in Hawaii, they became useless, those laws, because the state had so much more power. So you basically push the power up to the top, even beyond the government of a country. You can go to these international organizations, and so a country in Europe can say, well, we're going to ban glyphosate. And then the European Union says, no, 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 you can't do that. It's up to the European Union. This is happening all over the world. They're trying to push it all the way to the top and then absolutely control those organizations that are, international organizations, and make sure that they're on board with, we don't care if everybody's poisoned. This is how the system
Oh.
works, I think.
What do you think would happen if that did
Well,
occur?
we'll lose the species, basically, is what will
Oh
happen. We'll
my gosh.
disappear. I mean, I think that's where we're headed. We're going to disappear if we don't change things. I believe that because,
I
it's affecting reproduction. Many countries now have a reproductive rate that's well below 2.0. It's only a matter of time. Once you're below 2.0, it just takes time, you're gone, right? Because every year there's less.
yeah. And
Very simple math.
I read this article the other day where the insects are disappearing in large numbers and
They
that
are.
more doctors need to be taking this seriously as a signal. as a big warning sign. And that's,
Absolutely.
what we're doing. So yeah. Okay. Now back to Zen Honeycutt's
Right.
analyses. So what are
We
the
haven't got to
foods?
the food yet. Yes.
Yeah, we
So
got quite, I love that
we
tangent, but
wandered around. Well,
yeah,
this is fun. I'm having a good time. So,
me too.
yeah, she's great. And she has all her moms, and they have, and they meet and everything. And then her moms help her out. And the moms go and get food samples from the kids' school, lunches, or from the fast food restaurants. And they send them off to be tested for glyphosate and other things as well. She's looked at toxic minerals, and in baby food and things like this. So, she looked at school lunches and she found, I think it was 95% were contaminated with glyphosate of the samples. She looked at fast food restaurants, 100% were contaminated with glyphosate,
Oh.
and she's been looking at military food now, and that's not looking good. And it's just, the food that they feed the military at the military
Yeah.
organizations.
Yeah, that works. And what about like levels in the body? So it's like wheat, I know is sprayed,
Yeah,
all GMOs, corn,
yeah.
soy, and all of our foods. You're just
And I
saying,
should say legumes, because legumes have had, so Canada actually has tested many food samples, over 8,000 food samples for glyphosate. US doesn't bother. It's like, oh yeah, we know it's all over the food supply. We don't care. It's safe. They don't bother.
oh,
But Canada did over 8,000 samples. And that was really useful for me because I really wanted to know which foods, should you especially avoid. And it turned out I was surprised by legumes because that's, garbanzo beans, chickpeas, hummus.
wow.
The highest levels were found in those foods. And that's because they also are sprayed right before harvest. We just sprayed barley, so it's all over the beer, it's in the wine. Zen tested wines from California. Even the organics were contaminated with small amounts because they're sitting there with the fields all around them using glyphosate. They can't put a barrier at the edge of their property.
Yeah.
It comes in.
And
And of course, it's
waterways.
in the rain. I actually got a sample of rain at my office in Cambridge and sent it off to Anthony Samsel. He tested and found glyphosate in the rain.
Mm.
I
So
mean,
it's
so
like,
it's pretty much, it's everywhere in countries that use it as heavily as we do. We can't avoid it. I have been eating certified organic. When we shop at the grocery store, we always look for the certified organic label.
yeah.
That's been going on since 2012. We had a big purge. We threw out everything, including the spices, and started over when I realized how bad this chemical is. And it's really helped our health too, I feel.
And and I feel like there's at least been some survey levels, experiments or research to suggest that at least like pesticide levels get lower when you go all organic. And there
Oh,
was a
for sure.
survey. Yeah. So what has the research
And
shown
that's
about
even
that?
very fast. Yeah, because I
Yeah.
remember something about a family that switched to organic, and after 2 weeks, the levels were way down. I was really surprised at
Yeah.
how quickly, because what you measure when you do a urine sample is really reflecting the previous couple of weeks. It doesn't go much further back than that, so it kind of comes through, flushes out. So a small percentage of it sticks around, and that's where the danger comes
Yeah.
because you
And
get a little bit more every day, and it goes into your proteins. I think now this is a theory. And I have to say, it's not being well received. I just want you to understand that the chemical industry and agrochemical industry, they say, no, no, this can't happen. It's impossible. So this is where we're sitting right now. I think it's almost certain that it's happening because my evidence is so strong, and
mm,
they think it's impossible. So we have a bit of a standoff there.
I love that. Well, let's go into it because that is what people were saying. You have to have Dr. Seneff on to talk about glycine. We've had several podcasts about glycine do really well. People are really excited about it. So tell us, what is glycine and why does it matter for glyphosate? What's the
Exactly.
relationship? Yeah.
Yeah, and you can see they start with gly. They both start with gly. That's kind of a hint, right?
Interesting. Yeah, it's interesting.
There's a good reason for that. And glyphosate is an interesting molecule, and it actually is a complete glycine molecule, except for missing one proton. And
Mm,
instead of that proton, it has this thing stuck onto its nitrogen atom, which is a methylphosphonate, and that's a chemical unit that changes its behavior in dramatic ways. It's negatively charged, it's bulkier, it's very, very different in its properties from glycine.
mm,
Glycine is an amino acid, and it's the smallest amino acid. And it's extremely important in biology, certainly in the proteins. There are many, many proteins that have glycine residues at spots where if you replace that glycine with anything else, the protein is completely destroyed. In other
mm.
words, they absolutely have to have glycine at that spot. There's lots of proteins like that. And that's one thing I do with my searches through the literature is to find proteins that have essential glycines. I can give you an example.
Yeah.
Myosin is a contractile protein, and it's very important in the gut to kind of get the feces to push through, so that you can digest your food. Myosin. And myosin has actually, I think it was 11 different glycines in myosin that are highly conserved among multiple species. What that means is, this is another thing I do, is I look for papers that talk about species alignments. So they can get all these different versions, because every species has a different enzyme that's very similar to the other ones, but has differences all over the place. So it's fun to, in terms of mathematics, to just go and get all these alignments and align them and find out where they all have the same thing. So you have like multiple different animals' versions of that enzyme, or that protein, myosin, which is a contractile protein, and you find out where they have all the same thing. And you can see all these glycines, like 11 of them, that are all the same. So what that means is that those glycines are important to that protein. Whenever you have it being conserved across multiple species, it's important. And that's one way they find out which ones are important. But there's one glycine, I believe it is at 699. I'm not sure I have that number right. I think it's location 699 in myosin, in the human myosin. And there was a study, and it was a beautiful study. They said if you just take out that glycine, replace it with alanine, it kills the protein. It can only contract at 2% of capacity. Just that one small change, 2% capacity. And if you do that for a small percentage of the versions of that protein in a system, it messes up the ability of the whole muscle to contract. So I think it was like 2%. If 2% of the myosin molecules in the muscle have alanine instead of glycine, then the entire muscle can only contract at 50% capacity. In other words, just a small percentage of them can be broken to cause a major problem. And so when the myosin in the gut is getting exposed to glyphosate, and glyphosate is getting incorporated into the myosin can't contract very well, and you get constipation. And constipation is one of those conditions that's going up exactly in step with glyphosate. I think that may be the reason.
That's fascinating. But they're fighting you. So right now, this is a theory, but where are you along in the process of like showing people, having evidence for the fact that this is actually happening?
Well, what I've done is I've published several papers in which I talk about this idea, and I've managed to get them past the peer review process, never into a very high-end paper, of course. I mean, the high-end journal, they won't go near it because they fear the industry. But I have published several papers where I've shown all these different proteins that have susceptibility to glyphosate based on the fact that, and I can give you another example, which is, for example, Alzheimer's disease is going up dramatically, exactly in step. Alzheimer's is based on this amyloid beta theory, about amyloid beta misfolds, and that's associated with Alzheimer's. Amyloid beta has a sequence of a specific amino acid sequence, which is called GXXXG. 3 glycines, wild cards in the middle. They can be anything. They're specific things, but they can just be anything. 3 glycines. Those 3 glycines are important in that protein to form the alpha helix that allows it to do what it's supposed to do when it behaves properly. And they have zeroed in on that particular region of that protein as being the place where bad stuff happens that causes Alzheimer's disease. So it misfolds. And so it misfolds if you get rid of those glycines and replace them with something else. The glycines are critical for making the alpha helix. And when you take away the glycines, the alpha helix falls apart, it becomes a beta sheet, and that's what makes it misfold. So it's basically, you can put glyphosate in there for those glycines and you can mess it up, I believe,
So what is this mechanism by which they're getting misplaced? Is it just the availability is there that it looks super similar? Can you just explain that to someone who might be new?
Yeah, it is glycine, right? So glycine is the smallest amino acid, and like glycine, glyphosate also has that very small thing. It has extra material stuck on its nitrogen atom. But the part that matches, so there's an enzyme, a fancy enzyme that actually can match glycine and it won't match any of the other amino acids usually. It can make mistakes, but mostly you have all these enzymes that assemble the proteins according to the DNA code. It's quite beautiful. You have this 4-letter code, which is the nucleotides in the DNA, and it's read off on a ticker tape 3 at a time. And each sequence of 3 codes for a specific amino acid. So there's 64 possible codes with a 3, and so 64 possible codes and only 20 amino acids. So there's redundancy. Sometimes a single amino acid has multiple codes, but so glycine has multiple codes. It has actually, I think it has a wild card on the 3rd place. So it's a GGX, two guanines, and then a wild card. Anything that has 2 guanines at the beginning matches glycine. And then there's these proteins that catch the glycine. and put it into the little pocket.
Mm.
And it has a tight little pocket that won't fit any of the other amino acids because they all have extra stuff. Glycine has no side chains.
Mm.
Glyphosate has no side chains either, so it fits in that pocket. The
Mm.
only quote unquote side chain that glyphosate has is on the nitrogen atom, which is outside of the pocket because nitrogen has to hook up, like paper dolls. It has to hook up in the chain. It can't be hiding inside the pocket. So that's why glyphosate fits. It has exactly the same size. It's exactly perfectly matched to glycine. It's not just some small variation. It's exactly perfectly matched. The only problem is it has that extra stuff, and that could get in the way. So that could cause it not to substitute for glycine, except under certain special circumstances. And it turns out there are special circumstances that really matter. I talk about this in my book, by the way, Toxic Legacy. You can see it back there on my shelf.
Yeah. Yep. I read that several years ago. Amazing
Yeah.
book. Highly recommend. Yeah.
Thank you. And I talked about the whole thing of the glycine analog and the glyphosate fitting into the socket, but the extra stuff. So it turns out glycine is critical at places where certain proteins bind phosphate. Phosphate is a very important molecule in biology. It's very active with various enzymes and whatnot. And so there's a large number of proteins that bind phosphate. For example, bind ATP. ATP is the energy source. They need to bind ATP in order to get their energy. It's adenosine triphosphate, so it's got 3 phosphates there. And so proteins that bind ATP actually have a motif at the place where they bind that has 3 glycines in it, a short motif that has 3 glycines. So the enzymes like to put glycine at places where they bind phosphate because they want to leave room for the phosphate. The phosphate is kind of a big molecule. It needs to come in to some place where they've got the protein shapes to fit. It's fascinating the way proteins work. But so when they choose glycine because it's small. So glyphosate has this methylphosphonate. It almost looks like phosphate. So glyphosate is very happy to steal that spot that's supposed to be for the substrate and put its methylphosphonate there. And then it goes into the protein that binds phosphate and wrecks its ability to bind phosphate. That's what happens with EPSP synthase. So that's the enzyme I told you earlier I was going to get into that.
Yeah.
EPSP synthase is the enzyme that glyphosate famously suppresses in the plants and in the microbes. And that enzyme has a glycine residue at the place where it binds phosphate. And the phosphate is in this PEP, phosphoenolpyruvate. So glyphosate binds, glycine, the glycine in this protein is there at that site to leave room for that PEP to come in. And then there's papers that show that the way glyphosate disrupts that enzyme is by taking up the room where that substrate is supposed to go. But the way they tell it is that glyphosate is substituting for PEP. They think it's substituting for PEP, but they're wrong. It may do that as well, and that may be part of the factor. But I think the real thing that it does that's really devastating is it substitutes for the glycine in the protein, okay, in the enzyme itself, EPSP synthase. So it goes in there where the glycine is supposed to be. It blocks the ability of PEP to bind, and then it wrecks the ability of the enzyme to do its job. And in fact, they showed in studies that if you replace that glycine with alanine, they can do this. There's lovely papers that are printed, published by the industry. When you replace that glycine in the protein, in the EPSP synthase, with that glycine with alanine, which is a very small change, extra methyl group, it completely protects it from glyphosate. And that's the basis of the GMO crops. Get rid of that glycine, replace it with alanine. And those crops they got that special version of it from a microbe that was growing where there was lots of glyphosate. And they found this microbe that didn't have that sensitivity that way, and that microbe had alanine instead of glycine at that spot. Wow! And it had some other adjustments to make the protein have room because it's got that extra methyl, but then you can kind of arrange the other amino acids nearby. It's really clever with evolution that you can kind of tweak it here, tweak it over there, and make it all work again with a slightly different shape. And that's what that enzyme is. It's a little bit different. But an important difference is it doesn't have glycine at that place. And when it doesn't have glycine, it's completely 100% insensitive to glyphosate. And that is amazing to me that it's so black and white. Yeah. And that's because you can't substitute once it's no longer glycine. Okay. It's a different code. And then glyphosate is completely dead in the water, can't affect that protein anymore.
So yeah, so protein and the proteins in our body do so many different kinds of things. Like you
Oh
said, we're
man, they're
going,
the workhorses. Yeah.
yeah, tell everybody like just what kind of domino effect that can create if your proteins are misfunctioning. And also like in collagen, I mean, where are these glycine molecules? What would symptoms be that we would have this dysfunction?
Yeah, that's huge. I'm going to close my shade there because I've got the sun there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, do it.
The sun is rising.
It's early. We got her at 7 a.m.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. So there's, I mean, these proteins that have glycines that are highly critical are do an amazing number of diverse things, incredibly important throughout the body with not just enzymes, but also structural proteins and transporters. Just lots and lots of different proteins are impacted by have essential glycines at critical places that would be devastating if they're not glycine. And you can find that by looking for mutations. As I said, I look for diseases that are associated with mutations in glycine residues in certain proteins. And then you can correlate that with, is that disease going up dramatically in association with glyphosate? Sure enough, it is. Yeah. Therefore, that glycine. And the myosin is a good example, and that's going to cause paralysis of the gut. Actually, there was a woman who tried to commit suicide by drinking glyphosate-based formulation, nearly succeeded. And they had an article about her as a case study. And in that article, they said specifically one thing they observed that was surprising was complete paralysis of her gut.
Oh, okay. That's and see, and that would fall in
That's
line with your
evidence to
theory. That
me.
is very good
Exactly.
evidence of your theory. And I know glycine is a very prominent amino acid in collagen. So, like you said,
Absolutely.
structurally, how would that change things? Like, would we have
Yeah.
pain?
Well,
What would
well, like Ehlers-Danlos. I don't know if you know about Ehlers-Danlos syndrome.
this is something that is circling in my world. I just learned about it like 2 weeks ago, but talk to
Oh,
me. Tell people
timely.
what, yeah, tell me about this.
And I think I probably talked about that in my book, but Ehlers-Danlos is a condition that's associated with glycine residue mutations in collagen.
Mm.
And so many different glycines in collagen actually that can be mutated and associated with in association with Ehlers-Danlos. It's a genetic disease, but it's going up over time.
I've
So it's a
seen that.
genetic disease, but it's going up over time. Well, that doesn't make sense, right? Because genes don't change, genetics doesn't change that fast. But it's going up because you're getting bullets in the collagen from the glyphosate in all kinds of different glycine residues
Oh,
randomly throughout the collagen, I
and
think.
have they ever looked at people and their body burden of glyphosate who have
I
EDS?
don't think they have because nobody believes what I'm saying. But, and Anthony Samsel got a sample of a horse's hoof from a horse that died from founder. And founder is like you have these, the hoof is in bad shape. That's what causes them to put the horse down from founder. He got a sample from that hoof and he analyzed it and he found high levels of glyphosate in the hoof. And the hoof has lots of collagen. So that's just, one example. But
Yeah. And if you have EDS, from what I've read, and you can correct me, it's like you get injured frequently, a lot of
yeah, you have
laxity
this
in your
very flexible
tendons.
joints where you can put your fingers back onto, your joints are sometimes they're very flexible. Mine are not. I don't
Yeah,
have but
me
you can,
neither.
you can put your hand back onto your arm type of thing. You know what I mean? Like this.
Yes, which I can't do either. But I have a friend. Ever since I've heard about EDS, I have so many people who have it. And when it comes to children, it can be a serious thing. So that's interesting that
Yeah,
you
it
think
makes you very
glyphosate.
susceptible to injury, for one thing. Yeah. Uh,
Exactly.
and I think it's what's and there's also what I always forget what this is called. There's this condition where all your organs kind of fall down into your
Prolapse.
cat. Yeah, exactly. That's another one I think that's going up, and I think that's because both the muscles are getting weak, and the
Mm.
collagen's getting wrecked, and so the whole system is just kind of like it's not really working properly, and it just all flops down and causes serious problems.
Oh, and don't worry, everybody. This is, it sounds sad, but we're going to get to some solutions for sure. But one thing, and I want to go to deuterium in a second, but Dr. Brind, I had him on, and I know I've kind of like made you two aware of each other's work. And he is big on glycine's role in the immune system. So if
Hmm.
glyphosate, do you think there would be impact of your mechanism on immune health too? Do you think there's some interplay there?
I definitely think glyphosate messes up the immune system for sure. And that's partly because, of course, it messes up the bacteria, and then it causes the immune cells that draws them into the gut, and you get inflammation. And inflammatory bowel disease is one of the conditions that's going up dramatically, exactly with glyphosate. which makes total sense to me. And it's because glyphosate is killing off the beneficial bacteria. It gives the pathogens a chance to grow. The pathogens draw in the immune cells, and you get the inflammation. That seems very simple to me. Glyphosate has been shown to preferentially kill bifidobacteria and lactobacillus. I mean, those are super important microbes in the infant gut. I mean, the infant really starts out with those two as key to its whole system, and they're getting killed off by glyphosate. And now I got diverted because I forget what you asked me.
I know that was right.
You were saying, glycine in the immune system. I mean, that's interesting. I haven't specifically looked at glycine in the immune system. I could imagine that there are proteins that the immune cells make that have sensitive glycine sensitivity. I could imagine that's the case. Glycine is a neurotransmitter, so I know glyphosate can substitute for glycine as a neurotransmitter and mess things up in the brain, for example.
What does that look like?
Well, that looks like autism, for example. I definitely think autism is. I think that I've oscillated between the V word and glyphosate as far as the primary cause of autism, but I lean towards glyphosate. And in fact, there is glyphosate contamination. That's one thing. Zen Honeycutt did vaccines. She looked at several different vaccines, and she found glyphosate contamination in the live virus vaccines, and MMR had the highest levels. So I wonder whether the V related autism is actually a glyphosate problem.
Oh, fascinating theory. Like you said, there's just this domino effect, right? When you negatively impact even just the gut, right? Or even just chelating minerals or these protein substitutions. I mean, just the wake of this destruction is massive. So let's talk before we get to deuterium. I want to say, what do we do about this? Like, so if we're substituting glyphosate for glycine, do we flood our bodies with glycine? Are there
that's a good idea. And in fact, I have many naturopath friends who have told me that they use glycine with their patients, and it seems to be very effective. So I do think, and of course, I think also organic, bone broth would be a really healthy thing to get a lot of, to eat organic bone broth, because that's got a lot of glycine. Collagen, anything with collagen. Has lots of glycine, like pig's feet, of course. The Chinese really like these foods that have lots and lots of collagen, which is probably in part because of the glycine. It's a very good source of glycine.
Pork skin, I mean fish skin, and so we're eating organic. We're trying to flood our body with glycine, and then are there any other steps that you take for people? Are there
fermented foods? Fermented foods are very important. Yes. That can help to keep your gut microbiome intact.
I love that. Okay.
And so for example, fermented cabbage, sauerkraut is a great food because the cabbage itself has sulfur. And we haven't talked about sulfur, but I think sulfur is super important. And we have a big problem with sulfur deficiency today, and especially with sulfate deficiency. Glyphosate actually prevents the uptake of sulfur into the plants. So the plants become deficient in sulfur. And so then our diet becomes deficient. But on top of that, there's multiple enzymes. And I talk about that in my book. Multiple enzymes in the whole sulfation system that depend upon critical glycine residues.
Wow.
At places where they bind phosphate. So it's really, really sensitive to glyphosate destruction. And when you don't have enough sulfate, you end up with a problem with the glycocalyx. And in fact, the sulfomucins in the gut that line the gut are super important for keeping the gut healthy. They keep the bacteria out. They build a nice barrier. They have the gelled water, sulfomucins in the gut, which is basically like the glycocalyx lining all the blood vessels. It's also dependent on sulfate. And there's all these sulfates that just stick to these molecules, these very complex sugar molecules. They have sulfates attached to them at random places, at lots of pseudo-random, I should say. But they can have less, they can have more. If they have more, then the vessel is sturdier. The vessel is protected by the gelled water that's formed from the sulfate. And the same thing is true in the gut. In the gut lumen, you've got all these sulfates in those sulfomucins that are keeping the gelled water in place, and also just making a nice barrier that keeps the bacteria out, so they can't get past the gut barrier into your body, which could cause, sepsis or something. But so basically, those sulfates are super important in the gut, and they're deficient. And I think they're deficient because glyphosate's wrecking the enzymes that make them and that attach them.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Now, Zach Bush has done some research around the microbiome. Has he looked at any of these particular mechanisms, or are you familiar with that?
I am, yes. And in fact, I think Gerald Pollack, I think, did a study in which he showed that glyphosate disrupted that gelled water.
Mm.
Um, in those, he studies that gelled water. Gerald Pollack.
I've heard of him, but I don't know him personally.
Yeah. He's written several books, and they're fun. He's a good guy,
Okay.
and he talks about the sulfates and how they gel the water and how that keeps everything safe in the blood vessels. And he's even got a new book that's on the sort of ocean and atmosphere that's quite fascinating with
Ooh.
respect to the ocean water and how that deals with the sulfate and the gelled water and all of that. So it's pretty interesting stuff. He talks about a battery that gets created through the gelled water, and he thinks that
Oh.
battery is that humans can actually utilize sunlight. We basically are a big solar panel. We utilize sunlight, which and especially the infrared light, which grows the gel by a factor of 4. He showed an
Mm.
experiment.
Mm.
Infrared grows the gel, and so the gel is there because of the sulfates. And then when the light shines on your body, the gel gets bigger, and that makes better protection for all the blood vessels. So it's really cool stuff. Fascinating. And then it creates the battery, which actually pumps protons out of the gel. The gel becomes negatively charged, and the protons are shipped out into the blood, and then they can circulate. So you create a battery, which is a source of energy
Oh, wow, that's
in
fascinating.
all the blood vessels, and maybe in the gut as well. I don't know, but he didn't talk about the gut.
Wow.
But
I'm gonna have
that's
to
cool stuff. So
super cool. And I have a garlic sensitivity I've noticed. Do you think that could be related to maybe
I
I'm having
do.
some damage in my sulfation pathways somehow
I
or these
absolutely think
enzymes?
so. And in fact, when I first started talking about sulfate, I got email from multiple people who said, I can't eat sulfur. I
Yeah.
have a sulfur sensitivity problem. And I didn't, that's when I became aware from these people who sent me email. I appreciate, by the way, all of you people who send me email about your life story, because it adds to my, my puzzle.
Absolutely. It's my favorite part too. So if you were me, other than avoiding glyphosate, like is there a way to kind of rehabilitate those enzyme
Yeah, so I
pathways?
don't know how many. I know a lot of people have sulfur sensitivity, and I don't know what percentage of them have it due to genetics, because that's, genetics can cause that.
Yeah.
And it can be the genetics of enzymes that are sensitive to glyphosate. So what's happening, I think, is that probably sulfur sensitivity is increasing. I haven't
Mhm.
done a study specifically looking at it. I bet money that it is,
Mhm.
and it is because glyphosate is messing up the sulfur system. And
Mm.
I think that's absolutely critical that you don't get enough sulfate in your blood vessels, which then makes them really fragile, which then leads to things like heart disease,
Mm.
which is another one. I mean, I can't say heart disease is going up in step with glyphosate. I haven't found that, but LDL is. I did do a study
Oh.
on the, it was hospital discharge data,
Hmm.
and looking at the elevated LDL. And that is one of the things that's going up exactly in step with glyphosate, increased LDL,
What do
which,
you
goes
propose?
directly to heart disease, right?
Yeah, I mean, we think, yeah, but what do you think would be the mechanism by which that is
I think
occurring?
it could be a sulfate deficiency problem, because cholesterol sulfate is a very important, in my opinion, very important molecule, a bit of a mystery. And
Mm.
this hasn't been enough written about it, cholesterol sulfate. I think it's super important. And it's made in the skin, and it's released into the blood from the skin, cholesterol
Mm.
sulfate. And it's a handy molecule because it makes cholesterol water soluble. Cholesterol is a fat soluble molecule, which makes it hard. You can't just ship it in the blood freely in the blood because of that, because it's fat soluble. So the liver has to package it up inside these LDL particles to send it out and hide it. And the LDL particles have cholesterol sulfate in their membrane,
Mm.
cholesterol sulfate, and that allows them to go into the water and be water soluble because of that cholesterol sulfate in their membrane.
Mm.
And so the cholesterol sulfate actually can move very easily from one membrane to another. So you have all these lipid particles in the blood that have cholesterol sulfate in their membrane, including, by the way, the red blood cells, though they have cholesterol sulfate in their membrane. And so the cholesterol sulfate, just like the glycosaminoglycans, which are also sulfated,
Yeah.
but the cholesterol sulfate allows these LDL particles to travel in the blood safely without getting attacked by
Mm.
oxidation damage, glycation damage. It's a protective barrier that's formed by the cholesterol sulfate that's in the membrane of the LDL particle, which gives it that gel layer that protects it. It puts a shield around it.
Mm.
And so when there's not enough cholesterol sulfate, well, first of all, you've got to ship cholesterol hiding inside LDL particles. You can't just ship it as cholesterol sulfate. So you have to put more into the particles, which means you have to make more particles. And so
Got it.
that's where the LDL goes up. So I think that it's probably connected to the sulfation problem.
That's really fascinating. I love your ideas, your brain. It's just wonderful. And you're such a great teacher. Before we go to deuterium, how do we get someone to do this glycine for glyphosate or glyphosate for glycine study? Like, what do we need to do? I just want to know,
Oh yeah. Well,
how
it's
do we
already
do
been
this?
done. I think it's already been done. I think it was successful, only they misinterpreted it.
Oh, tell
There's
me
a
about
paper. There's a paper. The title is something like glyphosate does not substitute for glycine in protein synthesis, something like that. It says does not in the title. And when you read the paper, it's amazing because it found glyphosate substitution
it.
in several different proteins. And it has this chart, it has a figure in which it shows these, I think it's 12 different proteins in which it found exactly glycine substitution for glyphosate. And it does that by what you can actually weigh the peptide sequence and find out that it's too heavy. And it's too heavy by exactly the amount that it would be too heavy if there was a glyphosate substitution. And they found 12 hits. And then they actually said what the sequence was in tiny, tiny print that you can't read. You have to get it on the computer and blow it up to read it. Wow. But I did that. And I wrote an article that I put up on my website that said, does glyphosate substitute for glycine? And I basically talked about that paper, its results, those proteins. And it turned out that many of them bind phosphate at places where they're highly conserved glycine. In other words, they matched extremely well with my theory. The proteins that they found matched well. They had the substitution that was correct for the weight of glyphosate. And then they said all of them were noise. They were errors because what they said derailed it was that they had equal amounts of these substitutions in the treated cells versus the untreated cells. And what they were growing was breast cells. They were cancer cells from the breast. From many years ago, these cells had been maintained in a culture at a lab for decades, because they came from some woman way back when who had breast cancer, and they worked really well. And so they're a cell line that everybody uses, for these experiments. So they're breast cancer cells, and they had the treated group and the untreated group. And then both of them had hits, many hits. Well, so when you think about it, they were living in culture for many, many decades, being given nutrients that probably were contaminated with glyphosate. And I highly suspect that because where those nutrients are sourced, so they've been fed on glyphosate for their whole life, for many, they've been kept alive for decades and fed on glyphosate. So by the time you get to the point where you're doing the study, both of them are probably already heavily contaminated with glyphosate throughout their proteins that they have. They break down those proteins, release the glyphosate, put it into the new proteins, and then there it is. So I think it wasn't fair to say that the untreated group was not treated. So I think what happened was both of them, and you can rig it so that you provide the glyphosate in such a way that it doesn't really get taken up by the cells. I know that you can do that, and I imagine the industry probably does that sometimes in order to show that it's safe. You can facilitate the uptake of glyphosate, or you can actually decrease the likelihood that it will be uptake. And I'm not saying these guys did that on purpose, but it's possible that the glyphosate that was added didn't really get in. And the glyphosate, the one that didn't have the glyphosate added, had already had lots of glyphosate from all those years of being exposed. Right. So I'm thinking that, sure, both of them had it. So of course you find it in both. So that's my take on it.
Okay. Do you think research...
They say it's not possible. They say it's not happening because it's all noise. They say it's all noise. But they did another test for something else and they didn't find any. So, they had two different things they were looking at. And the other one, I forget exactly what it was, some kind of glutamate thing. I forget exactly what it was, but they didn't find any of those. And then when they looked for the glyphosate, they found these 12, which are really beautiful examples of my theory, I think. Most of those proteins match quite well.
You're right. Like research is really hard to do well. And sometimes it can be set up in a way where you don't find what is maybe still there, right? And so
yeah, you can mess up. An experiment can be flawed. And of course, if it's a flawed experiment that produces a message that the industry loves, they're going to promote it,
Yeah, and all I just think is like this might be theoretical right now, but you can just still have glycine. Right, and I am telling you, the comments that have been populated on that podcast about glycine, it seems to be life-changing for so many people in terms of sleep and pain and all of these things. Pain, I'm thinking with your structural body. I just think like
absolutely. The pain I think is coming from the poorly the collagen really gets bad when you have all this glycine substituted by glyphosate. It doesn't form this beautiful triple helix structure that it normally has that gives it all of its great properties in terms of tensile strength and ability to hold water, all these things that it does. It depends on this helix, triple helix structure, which gets messed up when you start putting glyphosate in place of glycine in random places.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I went through the comments last night actually and looked at the conditions for which we had so many people, and it was pain and it was sleep. And so I thought it just like fit in so nicely with your theory. And I know we don't have a lot of time left, and I promised you deuterium. Like you're
That's
so
true.
passionate
Well, we
about
had so much fun talking.
I
Yeah,
know.
deuterium is amazing, and that's my latest passion.
Yeah.
And I'm convinced that deuterium toxicity in the mitochondria is the primary cause of the all the different chronic diseases that we are suffering from today. I think I would go out on a limb and say that it's deuterium toxicity in the mitochondria that's causing them. So you have mitochondrial dysfunction, which is linked to all these different chronic diseases. And then mitochondrial dysfunction causes the mitochondria to release this reactive oxygen, which then causes damage to the tissues, and the cell gets sick. Very basic, but the mitochondria release the reactive oxygen because there's too much deuterium. Deuterium is heavy hydrogen. It has an extra neutron. So hydrogen is the smallest atom. It just has one proton, one electron. Deuterium has one proton, one electron, one neutron. Makes it twice as heavy. And so it's present in nature naturally at 155 parts per million compared to hydrogen, which sounds small, but it's actually present in the blood at 5 times or 6 times the concentration of calcium. So compared to the minerals, it's quite, it's not in small supply,
And where's it coming from? Why are we having
it's everywhere. It's in nature. You can't avoid it. It's just part of life.
And it's
sort of
there's
like
no
iron,
steps.
right?
Yeah, okay. So it's like iron and we need it to some extent, but are there ways that we can reduce our intake or exposure?
Well, the trick is that the whole metabolic system has been designed with a very obsessive point of view that we got to keep deuterium out of the mitochondria. And it does it very elegantly with these enzymes, with very special enzymes that know how to. So there are these enzymes that have the capability of, when they do a reaction, here's a molecule, it's got a hydrogen on it. The enzyme needs to take the hydrogen off and go put it on something else, right? It just needs to transfer that hydrogen to something else. And the enzyme has an ability to say, if that hydrogen is a deuterium, which it randomly could be, the enzyme won't touch it. It's like, okay, you've got deuterium, you're out of here, I'm not going to do it. It only chooses the versions of that molecule that have hydrogen at that spot, that it's going to take it off, and it's going to put it on another molecule. And so there are all these enzymes that put hydrogen onto NAD plus to make NADH. And NADH is the primary deliverer of protons to the mitochondria. The mitochondria have this intermembrane space, and there's a matrix inside, like a donut, a donut hole. And in the matrix is all this activity going on, including, of course, the synthesis. So the whole mitochondria make ATP from things like glucose, right? They do this whole process of making ATP, which is the energy source for the cell. And they do that they pump protons into that intermembrane space and make it very, very acidic, basically. So the whole is basic, and the intermembrane space is acidic because it's got all these protons being pumped in there. And then the protons naturally want to get back to the place where there aren't many protons. There's a natural tendency in physics for them to want to get across that barrier, and they have to go through these ATPase pumps to get in. The ATPase pumps are sitting all on the inside. And the ATPase pumps, the protons come through, and they actually move a motor in the ATPase pumps. They make the motor go around. And that generates the energy, and the protons, it's the proton motive force that actually generates energy to make the ATP from ADP. So ATP, is made through this process, and that is the energy source for the cell, very, very important. And those motors don't want to see deuterium because deuterium gums them up. I like to use an analogy of sugar in the gas tank. The deuterium is like sugar in the gas tank. So it really wrecks the proteins that have that job. And there's tons of protons floating through those, passing through those ATPase pumps. And the mitochondria obsess on not putting the deuterons into that intermembrane space, only protons, as much as possible. And so it wants to minimize the exposure of that intermembrane space to deuterium. And it does so through these very complicated processes. And one of them is these special enzymes. But the other one that's super important is the gut microbes.
Uh,
And so they produce low deuterium, I believe, and I've written papers on this, I've gotten them published. They produce extremely low deuterium hydrogen gas
mm,
from organic matter. And then they use that hydrogen gas to make new organic matter. And that new organic matter is basically the short chain fatty acids, acetate, butyrate, propionate, and also methylation pathways, the methyls that are in methylation pathways. I
mm.
think all of those things coming out of the gut microbes are low in deuterium because of this kind of distillation process that happens with the hydrogen gas. And so
Wow.
it's really cool. So I really, the hydrogen gas is very central to the supply of low deuterium nutrients. And the colonocytes love butyrate. It's their favorite food.
Yeah.
And it's sourced from that hydrogen gas, which makes it low in deuterium. So it really keeps the mitochondria of the colonocytes healthy by virtue of having this low deuterium nutrient.
Oh my gosh. Well, that is fascinating. We got to do another podcast just
I
about
think
deuterium
I
because I
could do
promised you we do, and we've just run
we're
out
out
of
of
time.
time, and we can leave that as a hanger, but I'd love to do another one with you on the deuterium and also on how glyphosate messes it up, which it does so very, very well. It messes it up.
Because that was my next question. I knew there was going to be a through line. So, Dr. Seneff, this is always, I mean, this time flies by. You're such a great storyteller and connection finder. And I'm just so grateful for your time. So, can you tell everyone where can they follow you and this deuterium story that's evolving and, countless other theories that I know you're going to be
Yeah.
coming up with in the future?
Yeah, I've done a lot of YouTube interviews, like podcast interviews, and you can just search the word Seneff. I think you'll find a bunch of them. I do have a webpage, stephanieseneff.net.
Yeah.
And so that's basically it.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And
Yeah.
check out our book, Toxic
Yeah, my
Legacy. Like I
book.
said, one of my original inspirations. And we've gotten to have many, many conversations, and I hope that we'll have many, many more. So thank